My father refused to dance with me at my wedding to please his new wife. Then he saw who was sitting at table 3. There are moments in life when time seems to slow down, when the world narrows to a single point of devastating clarity, and you realize that the person you've been waiting for, the person you've been giving chances to for years, will never show up the way you need them to. For me, in that moment came on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Standing alone in a spotlight on my wedding day, waiting for a father who would never come. I had stopped expecting much from my father the day he walked out when I was 10 years old. The years that followed taught me to lower my expectations, to accept crumbs where I once hoped for sustenance, to find strength in the absence where love should have been. But when he offered to walk me down the aisle years later, something in me softened. Despite everything, despite the missed birthdays and forgotten milestones, despite the years of silence, broken only by occasional obligatory contact, I let myself hope. Just for a second, just enough to believe that maybe, finally, he was ready to show up and be the father I had always needed. He wasn't. I always imagined the tears on my wedding day would come during those picture-perfect moments everyone talks about, when I first saw my future husband waiting for me at the altar, his eyes shining with emotion, or during our vows when we promised forever to each other. I never imagined they would come while I stood alone on the dance floor, blinking through hot lights and smudging mascara, silently begging my father with my eyes as the DJ announced the father-daughter dance to a room full of witnesses. I never imagined the most painful moment of my wedding would involve not what happened, but what didn't happen, the embrace that never came, the dance that never was, the father who chose, once again, not to choose me. Someone in the crowd whispered urgently, "Go on. She's waiting." I could hear the confusion in their voice, the discomfort of watching something go terribly wrong in real time. Other guests shifted in their seats, unclear whether this was some unconventional modern twist or an unfolding tragedy. But my father, Richard, didn't move. He stood frozen beside his wife, Valerie, his second wife, the woman for whom he had abandoned my mother and me all those years ago, clutching her hand like she was the one who needed comforting, like she was the one experiencing something difficult. His face was set in that expression I had come to know too well over the years, uncomfortable but resolute. A man who had made his choice and was sticking to it regardless of the collateral damage. He gave the smallest shake of his head, barely a motion, a tiny movement that probably looked like nothing to most of the guests watching. But it was final enough, decisive enough, cruel enough to shatter something fundamental in me that I didn't even know was still intact. "I can't," he said quietly, but clearly, like it was nothing, like he was declining a second helping of dessert rather than rejecting his daughter in front of everyone she loved. But it wasn't just the dance he said no to in that moment. It was me. Again. It had always been me. The history between us stretched back to a childhood that had been fractured by his choices. My dad left when I was a kid. And it wasn't because of a job offer in another state or some complicated adult reason that might have made sense to my 10-year-old self. He left because he'd fallen in love with someone else, Valerie, a woman he'd been secretly seeing while my mom worked late shifts at the hospital, picking up extra hours to try to keep our tiny house from crumbling around us, to keep food on the table, to maintain some semblance of the life we'd built together as a family. When he finally told my mom he was leaving, standing in our kitchen on a Tuesday evening that had started like any other, he said something that would echo through my childhood and into my adult life. "It's time I started living for myself." The words hung in the air like a verdict, final and unchangeable. My mother's face crumpled, but she held herself together until I was out of the room. I heard her crying later that night, muffled sobs through the thin walls of our house. What he meant, though he never had the courage to say it so plainly, was, "I choose her over you both. I choose my own happiness over the family I created. I choose a fresh start over the responsibilities I took on when I became a husband and father." After that seismic shift in our lives, the birthdays became afterthoughts, acknowledged only when guilt or social pressure demanded it. He forgot the year. I turned 13 entirely, no card, not call, nothing. When I was 17, Navigating the complicated terrain of my final year of high school, he sent a card signed in Valerie's looping handwriting with a generic message that could have been meant for anyone. The love. Dad at the bottom felt like an afterthought. A formality added because it was expected rather than felt. At my high school graduation, a milestone I had worked toward for years, our staying up late, studying, stressing over college applications. He didn't even come. I scanned the crowd during the ceremony, looking for his face among the sea of proud parents. But he wasn't there. My mom and I took a selfie afterward in our front yard. Me in my cap and gown, her with her arm around me, both of us smiling through the sadness. We ordered pizza that night and watched movies. And she told me how proud she was, how I had accomplished this, despite everything. But the empty chair at the kitchen table felt heavy with his absence. When I got accepted into college, a moment of triumph that should have been celebrated, he responded to my excited text message with a single line, "Cool." I was never a college guy anyway. No congratulations. No pride. No acknowledgement of the hard work it had taken to get there. Just a dismissive comment that somehow managed to diminish my achievement while centering his own experience. So when I got engaged and he suddenly wanted to be part of things, showing up with enthusiasm and interest that felt foreign after years of indifference, I didn't trust it. Not at first. The shift was too sudden, too complete, too convenient. Where had this engaged father been when I needed help with algebra homework? When I got my first heartbreak? When I was deciding which college to attend? When I graduated? When I started my first real job? Still, he called regularly as the wedding approached. He asked questions about the venue, the flowers, the guest list. He smiled during our meetings, putting on the performance of the sitcom dad I used to wish for as a little girl. The kind of father I saw on television who showed up for his children and took an interest in their lives. Valerie clung to his arm during every single meeting. Always present. Always watching. Wearing a smile that seemed to say she'd earned her place at his side. That she had won whatever competition she imagined existed between us. "I don't know, Mom," I said one night, sitting at her kitchen table and twirling my engagement ring around my finger, watching the diamond catch the light. "It feels fake. Like he's doing it for show. Like he wants to look like Father of the Year for one day so he can tell himself he tried." Mom gave me a tired, knowing look that carried years of her own disappointment and betrayal. She'd been on the receiving end of his broken promises long before I had. "Maybe he's trying," she said gently, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. "Maybe he's changed. People do change sometimes." So I tried too. I lowered my defenses. I let him in. Just a little. Just enough to participate in planning this important day. When he offered to help with the wedding costs, I was genuinely stunned. "It's the least I can do," he'd said earnestly, looking me in the eye. "I missed so much. Let me contribute to this. Let me be part of making your day special." For a moment, I saw a flash of the father I'd always wanted. The one who took responsibility and showed up when it mattered. But the check never came. Not for the dress that I'd carefully chosen, trying on dozens before finding the one that made me feel beautiful. Not for the cake that would feed our guests. Not for the flowers, the venue deposit, the photographer, or anything else. Every time I gently brought it up, there was an excuse, a work emergency, a mix-up with the bank, an unexpected expense. The promises evaporated like morning mist, and I was left once again learning the same painful lesson my father's words meant nothing. My fiancé, Noah, and I tightened our budget and made difficult choices, pushing our honeymoon to the following year so we could afford the wedding we wanted. My mom, who had already given so much over the years, dipped into her tiny savings without hesitation. "You only get married once," she said firmly, sliding over the envelope containing money she'd been setting aside for years. "This is important. This is your day. Don't let his broken promises take that away from you." Still, on the morning of the wedding, Richard showed up like he hadn't missed 10 years of my life. Like the absence and broken promises were irrelevant now that he was present for this one day. He wore a designer suit that probably cost more than my dress, tailored perfectly to his frame, and flashed that charming grin I used to fall for as a kid. The one that had made me think everything was okay, even when it wasn't. Just wanted to make sure everything's perfect for my little girl, he said, using that nickname that felt unearned after so many years of distance. He looked around the venue approvingly, as if he had contributed to making this day happen, as if he had any right to take pride in it. Valerie stood beside him in a shimmering rose gold dress that looked suspiciously bridal, catching the light in a way that drew attention away from everything else in the room. It was clearly expensive, clearly chosen to make a statement. Custom-made, she announced to anyone within earshot, her voice carrying that particular tone of superiority I had learned to recognize over the years. Flew it in from Milan. No one else in the state owns it. It's completely unique. She smoothed her hands over the fabric, as if it were the most important thing in the world. Nobody had asked about her dress, but she made sure everyone heard about it anyway, inserting herself into conversations, ensuring that even on my wedding day, she was a focal point. The plan was simple, or so I thought. He would walk me down the aisle, giving me away as tradition dictated, and later we would share the father-daughter dance. That was all I'd wanted from him. Just a few minutes to believe he cared, to feel like his daughter, to have one memory I could hold on to that said maybe. Despite everything, I mattered to him. We had chosen to dance to Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. It wasn't just any song, it was our song. Or at least it had become mine in his absence. Mom used to sing it to me on the nights I cried after he left, when I was young enough to not understand why Daddy didn't live with us anymore. When I thought somehow it must have been my fault. The song became safety, memory, love. It represented the parent who stayed, the one who showed up, the one who sang me through the pain. He walked me down the aisle stiffly, like a man escorting a stranger, rather than giving away his daughter. His arm felt rigid under my hand, and he looked straight ahead rather than at me. There was no squeeze of reassurance, no whispered words of love or pride, no moment of connection. But I swallowed the disappointment, pushing it down where I had learned to store all the other disappointments over the years. Maybe he was just nervous, I told myself. Maybe this meant something to him too, and he just didn't know how to show it. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Noah and I exchanged vows that made people cry, promises we meant with our whole hearts. When we kissed as newly married partners, the room erupted in applause and joy. For those moments, standing at the altar with the man I loved, everything else faded away. The reception came alive with music and celebration, and the night sparkled with laughter, heartfelt spacious, and champagne toasts. I floated through it all, glowing with love and relief. Friends from childhood embraced me. College roommates told embarrassing stories. Noah's family welcomed me with open arms. For hours, I was carried on a wave of pure happiness, surrounded by people who loved me, who had shown up not just today but in all the small moments that made up a life. Until the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. The lights dimmed throughout the reception hall. The DJ leaned into the microphone, his voice taking on that special tone reserved for meaningful moments. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a very special moment, the father-daughter dance. I smiled, my pulse quickening with anticipation and nerves. I smoothed my dress and looked around for Richard, expecting to see him standing, making his way toward the dance floor where I would meet him. He didn't move. He sat at the table, his hand wrapped tightly around Valerie's, knuckles white with tension. She leaned in close and whispered something in his ear, her lips moving rapidly, urgently. I couldn't hear what she said from where I stood, but whatever poison she poured into his ear in that moment sealed the deal, hardened whatever resolve he was clinging to. I smoothed my dress again, a nervous gesture, and walked toward their table. I'm still hopeful, despite the growing pit in my stomach. Still believing that surely he wouldn't do this, wouldn't embarrass me like this in front of everyone. You ready? I asked gently, forcing my voice to stay light. casual, giving him every opportunity to do the right thing. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked down at his plate, at his hands, at Valerie anywhere, but at me. Valerie looked up instead, and her smile was tight, cold, possessive. It was the smile of someone who had won something, who was taking satisfaction in this moment of my humiliation. Then Richard said the words that would haunt me forever. Words I would replay in my mind during sleepless nights for months to come. Yeah, we're going to skip that. I froze. Surely I had misheard. Surely he didn't just say what I thought he said. What? He exhaled. Not with regret or apology, but with annoyance, as if I were being unreasonable by expecting him to follow through on the one thing I had asked of him. Valerie's already feeling excluded. This day's been hard enough on her. My ears rang. The room seemed to tilt. What are you talking about? He shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like this was no big deal. Like he wasn't destroying me in real time. You didn't include her in your speech. No toast. No mention. You could have let her say something during the reception. You made her feel left out. She's been feeling like she doesn't matter all day. My breath caught in my chest. I struggled to process what I was hearing. This isn't her day. It's mine. It's my wedding day. He sighed like I was being a difficult child. Like I was the one being unreasonable in this moment. We've decided to sit this one out. It's better this way. Less drama. I stared at him, willing him to look at me, to see me, to remember that I was his daughter, that he was my father, that this mattered, that I mattered. I searched his face for any sign of the man who used to push me on swings at the playground, who used to read me bedtime stories, who I used to believe would protect me from anything. He didn't move. He didn't change his mind. He didn't choose me. So I turned away before anyone could see me completely break. Before the tears that were burning behind my eyes could fall in front of all these witnesses. I rushed past the cake table and slipped behind the DJ booth, where shadows and music could hide my crumbling heart, where I could fall apart without an audience. Then I heard it. The sound that made everything worse. The DJ, cheerful and unaware of the family drama unfolding. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the bride and her father to the dance floor. A spotlight snapped on suddenly, bright and unforgiving. It hit me square in the face, illuminating me in my hiding place. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. For a moment, that felt like an eternity. I stood frozen in the beam of light. I hoped desperately, irrationally, that he'd change his mind, that he'd see me standing there and realize what he was doing, realize that this was his last chance, that some things can't be undone, that he'd rise from his chair and say, "Let's do this. I'm sorry. I'm here now." He didn't. But someone else did. Noah, my husband, the man who had chosen me every single day we'd been together, who had shown me what it meant to be loved consistently and unconditionally. He walked up to me quietly but purposefully, took the microphone from the confused DJ, and said clearly, his voice carrying through the silent room, "Looks like someone forgot what this moment means. But that's okay, because I didn't." He reached for my hand, his grip warm and solid and real. "Let me have this dance with my wife." We moved slowly, gently, to the music that was supposed to be for my father. I let myself lean into Noah's shoulder. I let the tears fall freely now, soaking into his jacket, and I felt safe in a way I never had before. Not broken, not abandoned, not second best. Chosen, loved, home. The guests understood what they were witnessing. And the applause that followed wasn't just polite acknowledgement, it was support, solidarity, love directed at us, and quiet judgment directed at the man who had failed so spectacularly at the simplest of tasks, showing up for his daughter. What Richard didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he sat there smugly believing he held all the power in this situation, was that the quiet man sitting at table 3, the one who barely touched his champagne, who had been watching everything unfold with careful attention, was Noah's great uncle Harold. He was a man of few words, but decisive action. Someone who had built his life and career on principles and integrity. He was also Richard's boss, the regional director at the company where my father worked, the man who ultimately decided who stayed and who went. As the music faded and applause filled the room, as Noah whispered words of comfort in my ear, Harold stood and walked calmly, deliberately toward my father's table. His footsteps were quiet but purposeful. The guests nearby sensed something happening and quieted down to watch. He stopped just behind Richard's chair and stood there for a moment in silence. Richard looked up, perhaps expecting congratulations on his expensive suit or praise for showing up at all. Maybe he expected sympathy for having to deal with such a difficult, demanding daughter. Instead, he got this, delivered in a calm, measured tone that somehow made the words more devastating. If this is how you treat your own daughter on the most important day of her life, then I can't imagine how you treat our clients when things get difficult. If this is your character, when the whole world is watching, I don't want to know who you are when no one is looking like you. Don't bother coming in Monday. Your position has been terminated effective immediately. The effect was instantaneous. Valerie's fork clattered to the floor, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. Her face went pale, then red. As the implications sank in, Richard's face drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse in a single moment. He started to say something, an excuse, an explanation, maybe even an apology, but the words wouldn't come. He didn't defend himself. He couldn't. What defense was there? He just sat there, speechless, while his wife's expression transformed from shock to fury to cold calculation as she began to understand what this meant for her comfortable lifestyle. I watched it all from the dance floor, still in Noah's arms, and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just emptiness where my father should have been. I haven't heard from him since that night. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to repair what had been so publicly broken. Just silence, which in its own way was the most honest communication he'd ever given me. A few weeks later, I sent him a single photo through the mail. No letter, no message, just a picture me and Noah, dancing under the fairy lights that had been strung across the reception venue. His hand on my back, my smile genuine and real this time. Both of us looking at each other with love and certainty. That was the moment that mattered. I wanted him to see. That was the dance that counted. Not the one he refused to give me, but the one I found anyway. As for Valerie, the woman who had whispered poison in his ear at my wedding, I heard through the grapevine that she left about 2 months later. Something about finding herself in Florida. Apparently, she'd packed up and moved without much warning, leaving Richard to deal with the consequences of his choices alone in the house they'd bought together. Apparently, when the corporate perks vanished, when the nice salary and benefits and status disappeared, so did she. Funny how that works. The woman he had chosen over his family, the woman for whom he had abandoned a wife and daughter, had no interest in staying when times got tough. She had been there for the easy parts, the comfortable parts, and she left when he needed her most. Maybe that was its own kind of justice. And Noah, my husband, the man who danced with me when my father wouldn't, who had shown me every day since that it was possible to be chosen consistently and completely. One night, several months later, while we were doing something completely mundane, folding laundry and listening to old records in our small apartment, he looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. Something that made me stop mid-fold and really look at him. You'll never have to beg someone to choose you again. Not while I'm here. Not ever. And I knew he meant it. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, feel it in every action he took. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration. It was a simple truth delivered while sorting socks. And that made it even more meaningful. Because in the end, the dance didn't matter. The title, Dad, didn't matter. The blood relation, the biological connection, the shared last name, I used to have none of it mattered in the way I once thought it did. What mattered was who showed up, who stayed, who chose to be there not just for the easy moments or the public performances, but for the regular Tuesday evenings and the difficult conversations and the quiet moments that make up a real relationship. My father taught me what love isn't. He taught me that DNA doesn't guarantee devotion, that sharing genes doesn't mean someone will prioritize you, that being called dad doesn't make someone a father in any meaningful sense. But Noah and my mother taught me what love is. They taught me that family is built through consistent actions, through showing up day after day, through choosing someone not just once but over and over again in 1,000 small moments that add up to a lifetime. I don't know where my father is now or what his life looks like. I don't know if he ever thinks about that wedding day, if he ever regrets the choice he made, if he ever considers reaching out. Part of me used to wonder if he would someday have a moment of clarity, realize what he lost, and try to make amends. But I've stopped waiting for that call. I've stopped hoping he'll suddenly become someone he's never been. I've accepted that some people simply aren't capable of being what you need them to be. And no amount of hoping or second chances will change that fundamental truth. Instead, I focus on the family I've built, the people who have earned the right to be called my loved ones through their actions rather than their titles. I focus on the man who saw me standing alone in a spotlight and walked toward me instead of away. I focus on building the kind of love I deserved all along, the kind that shows up, that stays, that chooses me every single day without hesitation or condition. That's the real happy ending. Not revenge or justice or public humiliation, though those came anyway. The real happy ending is learning your own worth, finding people who see it too, and finally understanding that you were never the problem. You were always enough. You just needed people who were capable of seeing it. And now I have them. Now I'm home. And that spotlight that once illuminated my loneliest moment, it led me exactly where I needed to be. And story. Two family must help each other, my mother whispered after my spoiled sister got out of jail and asked me for a spare room, a car, and $500 to start over. I said no. My name's Daniel. I'm 31. And last Tuesday, my sister showed up at my door with 2 garbage bags. Our mother. And the kind of confidence that assumes 3 years can wipe a grave clean. She didn't say hello. Didn't ask if I had a minute. She just nudged past me like my apartment was a lobby and said, "I need your spare bedroom until I get back on my feet." Mom hovered behind her, eyes wet, already bracing for my resistance. I hadn't seen my sister, Tessa, since the sentencing 18 months for identity theft and fraud, while the rest of us learned how to breathe around the crater she made in the middle of our family. For as long as I can remember, Tessa has been the golden child. Only girl. 3 older brothers, me, Marcus, and Evan, and parents who swore the sun rose early just so it could have breakfast with her. If she broke my Lego sets when we were 8, Mom would murmur, "Boys should share." When $20 went missing from my wallet senior year, Dad said I miscounted. At 16, when store security called because she'd slipped lip gloss into her sleeve, Mom said the store was being dramatic. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It taught her there would be a line and 1,000 hands ready to lift her over it. After I moved out at 19, I watched from a distance as the pattern solidified. Tessa dropped out of college twice. She cycled through jobs like they were trial memberships, 2 weeks here, a month there. Always a manager who had it out for her. She maxed out Dad's credit card on a Vegas weekend, $4. $280 on hotel suites and bottle service, and they called it a youthful mistake. Another time she bounced a rent check, and I quietly wired $1. $200 because Mom called me at midnight whispering, "Please, Danny, just this once." It was never just once. When she forgot Dad's truck needed oil and the engine seized on the freeway, the repair was $3. 900. He took out a small loan and told her it was between us. Somehow, between us always meant on everyone else's backs. 3 years ago, she crossed a line even our parents couldn't ignore. She stole our grandmother's identity, Grandma Evelyn, 74 then, and opened 5 credit cards in her name. $40,000 in designer bags and a trip to Miami with a boyfriend who introduced himself as a promoter Grandma realized only when collectors started calling. Threatening liens and lawsuits. The house at risk. The small brick house. Grandpa built by hand. The one with the creaking floorboard by the stove. I still remember Grandma's voice the day she told me. Measured, unbreakable. They say if I don't pay, they can take the house. She whispered. Your grandfather set every nail in these walls. I can still hear him curse when he hit his thumb. When the case went to court, Mom and Dad sat behind Tessa, crying quietly. I sat on the other side, holding Grandma's trembling hand. Mom begged me not to press charges. Said, we could work it out as a family. That jail would ruin Tessa's life. I stared at the courtroom seal and said, she already ruined Grandma's. I should have known that sentence would bury me under years of silent treatment. But I testified anyway. After the judge gave 18 months. I thought maybe the shock would land. Maybe the golden child would touch the ground. Look around. And see the mess she'd made. Last Tuesday told me everything I needed to know. Tessa walked through my living room like a landlord doing an inspection. This couch is kind of ugly, she said, flicking a crumb off the armrest. When are you getting a new one? She lifted a photo of me and Grandma from last Christmas. Grandma in her soft blue sweater. The one with the pearl button she kept sewing back on, and set it down face first without noticing. Then she opened my fridge and announced, Pad Thai. Perfect. As if she'd called dibs last week. She held the container up and asked, you aren't still mad about the whole Grandma thing, right? That was forever ago. People make mistakes. I felt something in my chest pull tight. Like a tendon snapping. Did you ever apologize to her? I asked. She rolled her eyes. Mom made me write a letter from jail. We doing this again? Seriously. The sound of the microwave door closing was louder than it should have been. Do you know she had a heart attack from the stress? I said. Do you know she sold her car, her only independence, to start paying off the debt? She still works part-time at 77 because her retirement got shredded covering what your mistake did. Tessa shrugged. Actually shrugged. That's not really my problem anymore. She said. I did my time. I'm moving forward. Which reminds me, can I borrow your car for interviews? And I need $500 for professional clothes. Because no one will hire me looking like this. Also, can you co-sign a lease next month? My credits. Like. Shot. Mom nodded along. These are reasonable things. Danny, you're doing so well. Family helps. Family. Every time I hear family helps family, I think of Grandma's house. The jar of mustard on her table. Always the same brand. Always the same dent on the lid where it slipped from her arthritic fingers. I think of the day I drove her to the bank with a folder of letters and statements I printed for her $5. 600 on handbags, with names I couldn't pronounce. 9美元. 200 inches, temporary holds. 1美元. 740 at a club called Flair. 2美元. 880 at an electronics store for a TV she never saw. That folder was so heavy with paper it felt like carrying a small animal. I should have seen it coming when Tessa laughed off the first late notice as spam. I should have known the day she asked for a copy of Grandma's driver's license for a discount program. I'm not your plan. I said quietly. I'm not your lender. I'm not your cosigner. And you're not staying here. The room shifted. Man blinked fast. Danny. She whispered. Don't be cruel. I'm not being cruel. I said. I'm being clear. My voice surprised me. It sounded like someone who'd finally located his spine. You made thousands of choices. Tess. Every swipe was a choice. Every lie was a choice. Every time you were rescued. You learned nothing. I won't be another soft landing. She laughed without humor. Wow. You always loved this being the righteous one. You testified because you wanted to be the favorite for once. Newsflash. It didn't work. She set my chopsticks down like a final period. You're jealous. You've always been jealous. For a second, I was 12 again. Standing in our kitchen, while Mom scolded me for tone after Tessa crashed her bike into my guitar. But then I remembered Grandma's shaky handwriting. The way she signed her name smaller each month, on the checks that went nowhere. You have 10 minutes, I told Tessa, to take those bags and leave. If you don't, I'll call your parole officer and report that you're harassing me for money. Mom gasped. Her cry went ragged. Mascara already tracing thin rivers. Heartless, she said. Real siblings forgive. She made one mistake. I looked at my mother, really looked, and felt something detach. Not love. Expectations. It wasn't one mistake. I said. It was thousands. And every time you bailed her out, you taught her there are no consequences. I'm not ruining her life. I'm refusing to fuel it. Tessa's mouth tightened. You're a bitter person, she said. Fine. We'll go. But don't expect me to forget this. She shouldered one bag, shoved the other toward Mom, and moved to the door. Before she crossed the threshold, she paused at the photo of me and Grandma and turned it over again. I set it upright after they left. The apartment went quiet in that way where you can hear your own heartbeat and the hum of the fridge and the clock on the stove click to 6:01. Dad texted later. You broke your mother's heart. Nothing else. No question about how I was. No mention of Grandma. My brothers Marcus and Evan took me for drinks that night. They didn't say much. Just sat shoulder to shoulder at the bar. The way we used to on the back steps when Dad and Mom argued around corners we couldn't see. Marcus finally said, You did what needed doing. Evan nodded at the countertop. About time, someone did. The next afternoon, a delivery came to my office, 24 white roses. The paper still cool from the truck. The card was in shaky script. Thank you for having a backbone. Love. Grandma. I called her and cried in the hallway. The kind of ugly crying people pretend not to notice when they walk past. You did the right thing. Baby. She said. Don't you ever doubt that? What they didn't know was that I'd spent 3 years collecting my own small ledger of lines. Every receipt I paid for in silence. Every apology I never got. Every time I was told I was too serious. Too rigid. Not fun. And yet a part of me, embarrassingly, I still hoped Tuesday might be different. That she would arrive with an apology, or even a softness around the eyes I could believe in. Instead, she came with garbage bags and a list. I should have known. I cleaned the pad.thai container Tessa had left on the counter. Wiped the ring it made. I looked around my small, quiet place, the thrifted bookshelves I built on a Sunday. The plant I kept alive for 16 months. The second-hand rug that smelled faintly of cedar when the sun warmed it. It wasn't fancy. But every inch of it was mine because I earned it with 60-hour weeks at a paralegal job that pays decently and bleeds time. I stood in the doorway where she had stood and realized I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even angry. I was done. And yet the house doesn't go silent when you shut a door. It keeps making its noises. The phone kept buzzing Mom's name, lighting the screen. Then disappearing. Dad again. Fix this. Then nothing. The quiet stretched. That's when a thought landed so softly I almost missed it. Tuesday wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Because if the golden child could walk into my home like history owed her rent, what would stop her from walking into Grandma's again? Remember this detail, the face-down photo. The way she couldn't look at Grandma's eyes even on paper. It will matter. The morning after the roses arrived, I drove straight to Grandma's. I stopped at the corner store for her favorite tea, Earl Grey, with the blue cornflower petals and a loaf of sourdough she likes to slice too thick. The porch steps creaked the same way they had when I was a kid sneaking out after curfew. A wind chime Grandpa made from bent spoons clinked in a thin breeze. Inside, the house smelled like lemon pledge and old recipe cards. Come in, sweetheart, Grandma said when I knocked. She was already at the kitchen table. The one with the burn mark from an overzealous Thanksgiving. The blue sweater again. Pearl buttons mismatched. Top 2 always reversed. The mustard jar sat by the salt. The dent on its lid glinting. I don't know why that detail always hits me like a bell. She poured tea while I set the bread down. We talked about small things first because she believes you should never jump into a hard conversation without warming your hands. The sparrow's nest above the porch light. The neighbor's new Labrador, who thinks fences don't exist. Then she put her palm on mine. Paper thin and warm. You held your line. She said, I'm proud of you. I don't know if anyone else is. I said, that's the thing about lines. She said, the people who cross them never like when you draw them. We went through her mail. It was a small mountain. 3 days worth, because she hates asking the carrier to bring it to the door. Coupons. Catalogues. 2 bills. 1 letter that made my throat go dry, pre-approved credit offer with her name in big letters and glittery embossing. The return address was a bank in a state we've never lived in. I looked at the based on information in your credit file line and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Have you applied for anything? I asked. Child, she said, giving me a look. The only thing I apply for at my age is a refund when they forget my senior discount. I laid the letter flat. The print at the bottom said, not a guarantee. Subject to credit report. A harmless thing. Maybe. But we don't get to assume harmless anymore. I pulled out the folder I've been building since the trial. It's a plain black folder with a red rubber band. Nothing fancy. But inside it's my map of a minefield statements. Timelines. Notes of calls I'd made with dates and names. I added the letter to a plastic sleeve and wrote the date in blue pen. Then, I called the 3 credit bureaus with Grandma sitting next to me. Speaker on. The call timer, ticking up in a corner of my phone. We added fraud alerts and full freezes. We set a pin and a passphrase Grandma would remember: blue lace. I repeated it because repetition is how you make things stick. I taped the pin on the inside of a cupboard door she uses all the time. Behind the honey. Next to Grandpa's measuring tape. Feels like building a moat. She said. Half amused. Half tired. Then we build the tallest castle we can. I said. Breadcrumb. While I was on hold with one bureau, Grandma's landline rang. It's an old phone with a coiled cord and a half-broken volume switch. Caller ID showed private. I let it go to the machine. A cheerful voice started in hello. This is Melissa from Sunrise Apartments. We're calling to verify identity for an application under the name. The voice trailed just enough to mangle the surname, then continued. Please return our call at your earliest convenience. She read off a number. My chest went very still. Grandma stared at the machine. Then at me. I didn't. I know. I said. Grabbing a pen. I wrote the number down. Circled it. Wrote Sunrise in block letters. The call ended with the fake brightness people use when they've already left for lunch in their head. I should have known it wouldn't stop at my door. Tessa doesn't believe in consequences. She believes in workarounds. If I didn't give her a car or a bedroom, she'd find a shortcut somewhere else. Of course she would. She'd pick the person with a history of being soft. The person who still signed her birthday cards with hearts around the name. She would go after Grandma again. I'm fine, Grandma said. Like she could will it into reality. We did the freezes. We're fine. We're safer, I said. But someone is already moving. On the drive home, I called the number. Sunrise Apartments. A woman answered. Voice from the voicemail. I kept my tone friendly. Just a man trying to straighten out a mix-up. Hi. Melissa. I said. I got a message about an application under Evelyn Hart. Great, she said. Typing clicks in the background. To confirm. Are you Ms. Hart or authorized on the account? I'm her grandson. I said. And I have her with me. Plus, fraud alerts are active. We need to know what information you received. She hesitated. I can't disclose specifics unless. Tell me this. I said. Was the applicant present in your office or online? It was online. She said. They uploaded documents. What kind of documents? I kept my voice even. My heart was doing its own sprint interval. Driver's license. Social security card. A bank statement, she said. We flagged it because the cropping was odd and the bank statement address didn't match. Our system automatically did a soft pull, and then someone called a few minutes later, asking if they could expedite. Who called? I don't have a name, she said. The caller ID just said, private. I thanked her, asked her to note the file as suspected identity theft and to contact me if anyone followed up. She said she would. She sounded apologetic, like she'd handed me a cracked egg. I hung up and stared at the dashboard for a long minute. Then I did what I do when I'm rattled. I wrote an email. Subject line, boundary notice no contact for financial requests. I sent it to my parents, Tessa, and BCC'd my brothers. I laid it out like a memo because clarity is kindness when emotions are floods. I wrote that I would not be providing money, housing, transportation, or co-signatures to Tessa. I wrote that any attempt to use my identity or grandma's would be reported. I wrote that grandma's credit was now frozen, that we would be monitoring. I wrote that any contact about money had to be in writing so there would be a record. I read it twice and took out anything that sounded like venting. Just facts and lines and dates. Then I hit send, and immediately my phone buzzed. Mom, this is cruel. Dad, you're escalating. Tessa laughed. My ass off. Enjoy being alone. Then I'm trying to rebuild. You're making it impossible. I didn't answer. I forwarded the sunrise voicemail to myself. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and went for a run. The kind where you aren't chasing a time. You're trying to outrun a feeling. It didn't work. Of course. Feelings have better endurance than we do. That evening, my manager, Priya, tapped my cubicle wall. Do you have a minute? Her expression wasn't alarmed. Just aware. We sat in the small conference room with the big plant that always lists toward the window. I got a voicemail from someone, she said carefully. A woman who said she was your sister. She didn't leave a name. She said you were unstable and had anger issues, and that she was concerned for grandma's safety. I waited for the heat to rise in my face. Instead, I felt something calmer predictability. Thank you for telling me, I said. My sister is recently out of jail for identity theft. There's conflict. If this escalates, I'll loop in HR proactively. Priya nodded. Please do. I've noticed your work has been steady despite everything. If you need time for appointments for your grandmother, it's okay. Document it and we'll code it appropriately. Support doesn't always look like rescue. Sometimes it's just someone naming reality without judgment. Breadcrumb. On my way out, I checked my voicemail. Another message, this one from a private investigator Aunt Lila had used years ago during a messy estate sale. Heard there's an identity case in the family. He said, if you want to talk protocols, call me. I hadn't told Aunt Lila anything. Someone else had. Information travels in my family like wind through an open house. I called him anyway. He talked me through steps I'd already taken: freezes, fraud alerts, limiting information, and then added one I hadn't considered: get a notarized letter from your grandmother authorizing you to speak on her behalf with banks and utilities. Not power of attorney yet. Some folks bristle at that. Just a narrow authorization. It helps when you're on the phone with a stranger who wants to do the right thing but needs cover. The next morning, Grandma signed a letter at the UPS store. She wore her Sunday shoes and a hat because she felt like a lady should look official when she signs official things. The notary used a stamp that sounded like a tiny punch. We got 3 copies. I put one in the black folder, one in her kitchen drawer with the rubber bands and birthday candles, and one in my glove compartment. On the way back, we stopped at the bank. Ms. Alvarez, the manager, who knows Grandma by voice, waved us to her office. We added a verbal password to the account Red Wing. Grandma smiled at that. Grandpa had been a Detroit fan till the day he couldn't be a fan of anything except his breathing. Ms. Alvarez printed a list of recent inquiries and circled a soft pull from a company I didn't recognize. It's an apartment screening service, she said. Sometimes they partner with property managers. When we got to the car, there was a flyer under my windshield wiper. Hiring now clean slate employment program. The logo was unfamiliar. The address wasn't far from Sunrise Apartments. Coincidence is a thing, but not very often in my life. I should have known the next hit would land fast. That afternoon, my phone lit up with an unknown number. "Hi, this is Officer Beck." A measured voice said, "I'm Tessa Hart's parole officer. I'd like to verify a report of harassment." It took me a second to swallow my surprise. "Happy to help," I said. "What exactly was reported?" "That you threatened to withhold her belongings and to call this office if she contacted you for legitimate assistance," he said. He sounded tired in a professional way, like a man who hears a lot and has learned to stand back from its heat. "I told her she had 10 minutes to leave my property after she demanded money and housing," I said. "I informed her any further financial harassment would result in me contacting you." He paused. "Okay. Thank you for clarifying. For the record, parolees are expected to avoid conflict that could lead to violations. We advise family to keep contact limited if it creates risk." He coughed gently. "Off the record, your boundaries are reasonable." "Can I report something?" I asked. "An attempted identity application on our 77-year-old grandmother. Please email any documentation," he said. "It might not be directly in my purview, but paper matters." After the call, I sat in my car and stared at the dashboard again. Then I drove to Sunrise Apartments. It was a new development. All gray siding and clean mulch. The kind of place that names its buildings after trees. The leasing office smelled like vanilla candles and printer ink. A young man at the desk looked up with a smile that slid when he saw my face. I didn't know what expression I was wearing. But it wasn't a leasing office expression. "I'm here about an application under the name Evelyn Hart," I said. "I spoke with Melissa." He shifted, then gestured toward a small glassed-in room. "Melissa met me there. She was kind. Early 30s, maybe. The kind of person who has perfected the art of apologizing for systems she didn't build. She showed me what she could a timestamp of the online application. The IP address masked by a low-rent VPN. Blurry uploads. Before I left, she lowered her voice. Someone called this morning and asked if they could switch the application to a different cosigner because the original fell through. The new cosigner's name was Daniel Hart." I didn't react at first. Then, I laughed. "A single short thing. Bold," I said. "That tracks." "Do you want to leave a note on the file?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And I kept it simple. Suspected identity theft. Contact grandson, Daniel, for verification. Do not approve without in-person ID from Evelyn Hart. Date of birth. I wrote it. Signed. Left my number. While I was there, a woman walked in with 2 large trash bags and a phone to her ear. She had Tessa's same haircut and none of her face. But I felt adrenaline anyway. She saw me look and look back like people do when they're deciding if confrontation is worth the story. She chose not to. She sat, texting fast. On my way out, my phone pinged. A bank notification. Attempted login from new device. Grandma's bank. I tapped the app with my thumbprint. Denied. Another ping. Password reset requested. Denied. A third. Your security questions were answered incorrectly. The questions were things nobody in our family would know. We'd set them together yesterday. The name of Grandma's first goldfish. The brand of Grandpa's tool belt. It felt like watching a stranger jiggle your front door in real time. I called Ms. Alvarez. She picked up on the second ring. We locked the account down to in-person only for 72 hours. Then added a temporary flag. Any phone contact must speak the passphrase to 2 separate staff. She apologized again. I told her I didn't need apologies, I needed frictions. She laughed a little at that and said she'd make all the friction she could. That night, Marcus texted a photo of Tessa's latest social post. "My brother is trying to ruin my life after I paid my dues." She'd written over a selfie taken at a bus stop. Eyes wet. Mouth set. The comments were a mix of sympathy and the pit you get when strangers think they understand a whole story from a single caption. I put my phone face down. Let the story run if it wants. I know how this goes. First the sympathy, then the requests, then the ask. Breadcrumb. 3 messages later. There it was. Does anyone have a room to rent for a month? She wrote. I can pay, and I have references. She listed my number as a reference. I blocked and reported the post to the platform for privacy issues. The platform thanked me with an automated message and an offer to connect with resources if you're feeling unsafe, which was both absurd and bizarrely comforting. The next morning, Grandma called at 7:12. I hate to worry you, she said. But a man came to the door with a clipboard saying he was here to set up internet service. I told him I hadn't ordered any. He asked if Tessa was home. I was already grabbing my keys. Did you let him in? I did not, she said, pride warming her voice. I told him my grandson handles all that now. He said he'd come back this afternoon. I checked the paper I'd brought home from Sunrise. Installation window, 2:04 p.m. Friday. Today was Friday. Don't open the door, I said. I'll be there at 1:30. On my way out, I grabbed the black folder, a fresh legal pad, and a handful of sticky notes. I wrote 3 words on the top one and stuck it to my dashboard record. Verify. Escalate. Because the thing about lines is you can draw them quietly or you can carve them into the ground. And some people only see the second kind. At 1:41 p.m., I parked in front of Grandma's house. A white van was 2 streets over, idling. I took a picture of its plate and the company logo. Then I went inside, poured 2 glasses of water, and sat at the kitchen table with Grandma while the wind chimes spoke in the window. At 2:07, the doorbell rang. The knock was light, polite, almost rehearsed like someone who'd been trained to sound harmless. I stood first. Grandma started to rise, but I touched her shoulder gently. Stay here, I whispered, through the small front window. I could see the white van from earlier. The logo Times Quick Connect Internet Services Times looked legitimate, but the lettering was just slightly off-center. A small thing most people wouldn't notice. I'd been noticing small things my entire life. I opened the door halfway. The man on the porch was in his late 20s. Baseball cap low, clipboard in hand, a laminated badge clipped to his shirt. Afternoon, he said cheerfully. I'm here to finish the installation request for this address. I didn't move. Who requested it? He flipped a page. Miss Tessa Hart. He read. Said she was setting up service for her grandmother while moving in temporarily. I stared at him. She doesn't live here, and there is no installation scheduled. He blinked, clearly realizing he'd walked into the wrong kind of house. Sir, I just get the work orders. What's the account number? I asked. He hesitated, then held up the clipboard. It had Grandma's name, address, and phone number, but the email listed was one I'd never seen. Evelyn Hart 74 at Consultant Mail. Com. Mail to Evelyn Hart. 74@consultantmail.com. A burner. She's 77. I said quietly. She doesn't use email. Someone's impersonating her. He frowned, unsure what to do. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I'll cancel the work order. Okay. Take a picture of that clipboard, I said. You'll want a record for yourself. He hesitated again, then pulled out his phone and snapped one photo. Good luck, he muttered and backed down the steps, glancing at the van. When he drove off, I took another picture of his license plate. Inside, Grandma was watching me closely. Was it her? She asked softly. I think so, I said. She's trying to build something, a fake setup. Maybe an address she can use for credit. Grandma sighed, pressing a palm to her chest. I didn't think she'd try it again. She doesn't think she's trying, I said. She thinks she's surviving.